Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. I did cut kind of a lot of changes this week to make the show shorter and to accommodate my schedule, but there's still quite a bit to talk about, so let's get into it. First up today from Swooch, we've got the oversized flag for duffel bags. Basically, all this means is that large and huge characters can now wear a duffel bag as a backpack. Finding wearable bags for these characters can sometimes be annoying, and having duffel bags be an option right out of the box is a nice little addition. This is pretty simple, it's straightforward, and obviously it's very good for those of you who do mutations. I will often take bear mutagen as well as cattle mutagen, so size issues can be a big deal for a lot of people. Next up today from Paprika H, we've got a new vegan trait. Now this is exactly what it sounds like. It uses our existing food allergy/restriction system in order to have a veganism trait. Now this goes beyond just vegetarian or herbivore by having the additional restriction of not eating foods with animal byproducts. That's what veganism is. And this includes worn clothing as well, so this does extend to leather, fur, chitin, really anything that comes from an animal. And if you attempt to wear one of these pieces of gear, you will receive a message saying that you can't wear that, it's made from an animal. So yeah, this is a nice little trait. It combines the sort of food allergy traits and then vibes of like squeamish as well with their restrictions. Next up today from Dr. Boomstick, we've got a hefty expansion to clothing items. Now this makes use of the variant system to expand many existing garments. So for example, there is a group of gear that exists in the game that's meant for hunters. It will show up in locations or shops that are associated with hunting. Well, in that group, there are some pants items, and thanks to this PR, those pants can now be one of a variety of items, each with a different pattern or style of camouflage. Now, although the PR has pants in the title, it wasn't just pants. They also did add, for example, some multiple variations for heels, including stilettos, block heels, wedge heels, blah, blah, blah. You get it. You know how heels work. Fur coats also got expanded to include multiple different flavors of fur, so you can now possibly find something like a tiger skin coat. Now this to me is sort of horrifying that you would have a tiger skin coat, but I know more than a few of you would be happy to roleplay Cruella if you were able, so there you go. Now, I don't have a lot to say about this. We have a pretty robust catalog of clothing already, and these are variants, so they're not. It's not going to mess up loot pools. It's just adding more flavor to things that already existed. Moving on, next up today from Rennick CDDA, we've got the option to cull more animals. Now, I didn't know culling existed in this game at all. I must have missed a PR about it because it doesn't look like it was done in this PR. But really, regardless, if you walk up to a tamed farm animal and you use the lowercase e key to examine them, you will then see an option to cull that creature. Selecting it will give you a confirmation that you do in fact want to kill that animal. And it's really smart that you added this confirmation, by the way. I definitely would have hit this by accident at some point. Now this does require a cutting tool, and once you confirm it, the animal is instantly killed. Now this is a better option than what we had previously. Really, your only option before was to to beat them to death with whatever weapon you had. And that could be kind of annoying. Just to do that took a little bit of time, but also because you're hitting what could have been a beloved pet multiple times in order to kill them, and that seems really inhumane. But anyway, as I said, this doesn't appear to have been added in this PR, so I just wasn't aware of it, I guess. Now really all that this PR did was expand the number of animals that could be culled in this way. Based on what was said, it looks like adult horses are the only common farm animal that is left that does not have that option. Really overall, this seems like a really good feature, and it makes sense to have been expanded to basically anything that you're able to tame. If someone out there is looking for contribution opportunities, the Tameable Wildlife mod may also be something that people could update using this feature. This looks like it's just a simple flag on the animal, so it probably would not be very difficult to add, although I don't know how the mod is set up exactly. Next up today from Carol, a very simple change which removed the Bionic Professions mod from the list of those that are enabled by default. So to be very clear, this mod still exists, it has not been deleted, it's just no longer enabled by default. Now the mod started as a temporary measure while Bionics were being reworked and still were mostly unavailable in the game. A lot of stuff has changed since then. We have Rubik and Zomboards that were added to be more appropriate sources of Bionics and etc. Now even though I said that this makes sense to me personally, and I explained why it existed and is no longer necessary, necessary, some people will not hear what I just said. So to reiterate, this was not deleted. You can still use this mod, you still have access to it. Please spare me the comments saying that they deleted it and they hate Bionics and all that other crap that usually comes along with changes like this. It will not break your existing game or saved mod list. This just applies for new installations and just applies for not being default. So hopefully that heads off some of those unfortunate comments. Next up today from Wax Cat Ape, we've got the implementation of a wall-mounted light. Now, like the light we discussed in our previous episodes, this one allows for you to select a direction when you place it down, which will let you control where the light will be pointed. Now, it's pretty simple. You can craft the disconnected wall light item and then use the construction menu to install it. Now, this does come with one issue, however. So first up, the good news is that when you install the wall light, that wall will automatically be treated as having its wall wiring exposed. So you don't actually have to reveal the wall wiring first, and the issue, unfortunately, is that if you do reveal it first, you cannot then install the light. It appears that whenever I revealed the wall wiring, it was still considered an in-progress construction, which then prevented me from building on top of it. Now, I have no idea if this is just a me problem or if it's even related to this PR in any way, but it is an issue nonetheless. This means that if you already set up a wiring system in your base where you have wiring all over the place, you're not going to be able to construct the wall light. So yeah, that is a bit of a problem. Otherwise though, having a wall-mounted light seems pretty great. They can't be moved once they're installed, but they also don't take up a ground tile, which of course will be handy in a smaller base. So overall, this is pretty great. I just don't really understand why my revealing wall wirings was still considered an active construction and caused some issues there. So I don't know. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've got various tweaks to leather armors and clothing. Now this is a lot of small stuff, mostly just adjusting the thickness, the coverage, and the encumbrance of those items. Now the change in thickness does also mean that their protection values have changed, albeit usually very just slightly and not a huge amount. Now overall here, I didn't really see anything that was a major change. Most clothing got nerfed into the ground in terms of armor value quite a long time ago, and even though the leather jacket is still better than a lot of cotton, it's really not armor. So most of us seeing these leather pieces change, like we're not using them for their protection values anyway, so a very slight change to those protection values and their coverage is not really a big deal. However, if you were using one of the armored leather jackets, which are specifically armor, you might want to check your gear and assess their coverage changes and what your actual personal needs are for your character. There were also several variants added to represent other styles of leather jacket, like a police and I think a biker jacket were added to the game. Now overall, I don't really think this PR will have a big impact on the majority of you, but it was an audit to leather gear, and I usually try to shout out audits if they're like really self-contained like this. So like this is specifically leather gear, so it's really easy to just say, oh yeah, you should check your leather gear and see what has changed. On that note, by the way, Carol has been continuing to audit various items in the game just to give them a shout out, but it's been very random, which items they're working on. It's not really self-contained, so that's why I never mentioned it. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've got an overall buff to the spawn of welding materials. Now, I ranted about this a little bit in the last episode and am generally happy that they have been buffed now. Now this was a quick turnaround. My concern was that it would be bad for several months until someone got around to buffing these numbers, but now they've been buffed, so a lot of what I disliked previously it's gone now. Anyway, these spawns were increased in multiple item groups, so you should find that garages and hardware stores will have considerably more welding wire and welding rods. Not only was their likelihood to spawn in the first place increased, but the number that they spawn was also increased. Smokes is also more likely to sell them, and in pretty large numbers if you want to go through the merchant route. Now the prices for these items were also decreased to compensate for finding them in larger numbers, although I doubt very many of you were selling your rods. They were much more valuable in the hands of a player rather than as trading fodder. Now, as for whether I think this is now balanced or whatever, I have no idea. Like I said, I think the buff to spawns was really something that we needed, but I don't actually have opinions on what the numbers should be exactly. As with most things related to spawn balance, it's one of those things you have to play with for a while and see what you actually need to craft and kind of get a feeling for it. However, I know a lot of people weighed in on the welding changes, and the consensus was that they were too rare even to begin begin with, and that change had made it a lot worse. However, because of the nature of item groups, I can't tell you exactly what it should be, but I'm optimistic that this is good. You know, your mileage may vary. I don't know, you could RNG into never finding them, but I think this is good. Overall, it's a good buff. I'm glad it happened very quickly. I was very worried this would take months, and yeah, you should be finding a lot more rods and welding wire now. Next up today from Rennick CDDA, we've got the ability to assign a new leader to your faction. So for a while now, if you didn't know, you could, when your character died in the game, you had the option to instead seize control of one of your NPC companions and continue playing. Now, this was a pretty nice feature. It's not uncommon to sink, an average playthrough is probably well over 100 hours for those of us who, if you survive the early game. And then oftentimes you will have your run end suddenly because a random NPC or a turret or whatever puts a bullet in your head, and that's the end. You wasted 100 hours of your life playing a game that now your character is dead. So having the ability to continue playing, it really took the sting out of all of that time investment. And I know some people hate this, they think it should be all permadeath, but it is an optional. You can decline, you can just die if you want permadeath. But anyway, the only way to transfer control to an NPC was to either die or use the debug menu to transfer your consciousness. Well, now if you have a faction camp, you actually have the option to select a new leader and transfer player control to that new leader. In order to do this, you will need to examine the bulletin board at your camp. You're going to notice that there's a new option called Choose New Leader, which will give a blurb explaining that you will then switch to playing as the new leader. Now, the only restriction here that I saw is that you cannot select a new leader for 90 days, and this applies at the start of the game as well, so you're not actually able to transfer to an NPC until at least 90 days into the game. Now, this is ultimately not a big deal, but I also don't really think this restriction is necessary. If a player wants to transfer control, say they just started the game and they want to jump to a survivor that has better stats, they can just take an intentional death if they want to switch control. So having this restriction seems pretty arbitrary when people could just pretty easily circumvent it, and 90 days is a pretty long time in this game. I overall have no meaningful opinions on the restriction. I think it's fine, but if you removed it or reduced it, I would also think that is fine. However, I also say that as someone, I pretty much never play with NPCs, so I really don't know. I don't know what the restriction should be. But anyway, once you've met the time requirement, you can then select to choose a new leader. This will open a new pop-up asking you how exactly you want to select your new leader. Autocratic means that you directly choose who is going to be your next character. Sortition means that your NPC will be chosen completely at random from the list of available NPCs, which does include yourself, by the way. You could randomize into still playing as your character. And democratic means that a survivor is randomly selected, however, it's weighted in favor of NPCs that have high social stats. And it's really important here to reiterate that if you use any of the random methods, it is possible that you will be chosen to remain as the leader and not actually transfer to another NPC. And if you are selected at random, you need to wait another 90 days to attempt to transfer control again. So it's super, super important that if you want to guarantee switching to another NPC, you need to select the autocratic method. Otherwise, you could just RNG into being the same player and have to wait many, many hours of playtime until it's possible to even try again. And while this might sound bad, there will be people who want to roleplay a democratic process or whatever, and so I do like this nonetheless. Those who are there to purely to force a change, that's what the autocratic option is for, and so, both people get what they want, basically. Now, regardless of how things ultimately shake out, you will then be in control of the selected leader, and yeah, that's really all there is to this. I know some people will dislike this because blah blah blah, CDDA is about permadeath, how dare they add the ability to change control on death or take control of your NPCs and blah blah blah, etc. And I think that's a really bad opinion to have. You as a player, of course, have the option to stop playing with the death of your character. You have the option to never transfer control through these elections. So these are purely optional features, and I don't really understand why some people always rant about these sort of things. So hopefully maybe this time we can get through it without a bunch of grief and people complaining about how we're making the game too easy and they hate us now and blah blah blah, etc. Now, I'm not really sure that I'll ever use this personally, but I do like this change. I think it's really cool. I like the roleplay possibilities. So yeah, I think this is a good change. Moving on though, we have yet another change here from A Noob in Disguise, which is a rework to gun skills. Now look, there is a whole mess of explanation in this PR for how the math works behind the scenes. And fun fact, I'm bad at math. I napped through most of trigonometry, and trying to understand formulae makes me kind of want to die. Now, based on what I read in the PR and my smooth brain trying to understand it, basically what I think it means is that the penalty added to guns at low skill levels was significantly increased. And it sounds like someone is mowing outside, but I really need to power through this, so hopefully you can't hear that, and if you can, I apologize, but I'm going to power through here. So basically, and this will probably sound confusion, every skill level that you had below level 10 had previously added 3 dispersion per lacking skill point. However, now it adds 10 dispersion per lacking skill point, which overall is very noticeable. You will definitely notice that you are much less accurate now. Now this seems to be the main thing that I think players will notice. This also made it so that aim time is more heavily affected by your weapon skills as well. So not only will you be less accurate, but it will take longer to reach higher levels of accuracy. Now these things together mean that at skill level 0 you will be much slower to increase your aim and be much less accurate than you were before. So I headed into town with an M4 and tried to test this out, and yeah, aiming is a lot slower, accuracy is a lot worse as expected. Alright, so I tested this more thoroughly since I initially recorded this audio, so I'm going to re-record this section and give my thoughts on the new aiming and all of that stuff. I think the overall lack of accuracy is pretty expected. You know, someone who just picks up a gun would struggle, you know, if they've never shot a gun before, to be very accurate against an enemy that's, you know, even 20 feet away could be an issue for a person who's never held a gun before. However, I really take issue with the aiming time, particularly when an enemy is standing directly next to you. I feel like it should not take you multiple seconds to aim at a guy who's within arm's reach. I think that's actually completely ridiculous and very frustrating, because once you're in melee combat with an enemy, there is an element of, like, maybe they're trying to attack you, maybe they're grappling with you. That obviously would make it more difficult to use, especially if it's a long gun, would be more difficult. However, I just overall object to the fact that I could reach out and punch this character in the face, but it's going to take me 2 or 3 seconds to aim a gun at them. I actually think is completely out of balance. Now look, overall, things were previously a little too easy to aim and shoot at enemies when you had very low skill level. So I don't have a problem with this nerf in general. I think that it overall is a good idea. I just personally am a little frustrated when something is standing right next to me and I struggle to aim at them and hit them. They're within, I could slap them in the face, but I couldn't shoot them, which is a little crazy to me. Now again, the only thing I can think here that would make sense is, like, maybe it's panic fire because you're in melee combat range, maybe you're dodging the enemy and trying to make a shot. That's really the only thing I could think of here that would justify this. So overall, I had a bit of a rant in the previous recording. I think this is overall fine. I just generally don't like the adjacency penalties that are here. It doesn't feel right to me. So yeah, overall, not really an issue to me. It is definitely noticeable. Definitely, you are you're less accurate, and it takes a lot longer to get to those good aims when you have 0 skill level. However, you do also, once you find a gun, you do gain skill relatively quickly. So I don't see this being a huge issue. However, it is something you're going to notice, so, just be a little bit more careful when you have 0 skill, and it may even be worth it to take a couple skill levels at character creation. Other than that, no real thoughts here, so we're just going to move on. You definitely will notice this, and it definitely will frustrate some people, but I don't have a huge problem with the way things are right now. So moving on to the next change. Next up today from number 474, we've got door locks for vehicle doors. Now, I'm a little fuzzy on all of this, but I'm pretty sure I understand how it works, so I'm going to explain this and then we'll talk about why I have concerns over this new system. So basically, to my understanding, this PR simply added a locking mechanism which can be installed on top of a door in your vehicle that will allow you to lock or unlock that particular door. Now, it does not seem to come on vehicles by default, so you will not be finding locked cars. I tested this pretty extensively just to make sure I'm not mistaken here, but it really doesn't look look like these were added to actual vehicles, so you're not going to find locked car doors as of right now. And since it's a part on its own, doing that would require you to edit basically every vehicle in the game and insert door locks, which maybe they will do that in the future. I had assumed that doors would be automatically converted to use these locking mechanisms, but again, it does not look like that is the case. I think it's really important to stress that you're not going to be finding locked vehicles everywhere. So anyway, you install this part, and now if you examine the door, you will be given the option to lock or unlock that door. Now initially, NPCs could not interact with these locks, but it looks like that was later amended to allow them to do so. So basically, if I lock my door and start to drive away, the NPC will follow the car, but they can't enter the vehicle because I locked all the doors. If I unlock the door, then they can path inside appropriately. Now the only interaction I could find is that if you instruct them to lock doors behind them, they will path through doors that are unlocked and then lock them as they move through. So maybe that's what they meant when they said NPCs could interact with locking mechanisms, because that's the only one I could find. I don't know what else that would mean. Now once inside a vehicle, they can be instructed to close and lock doors that they move through, so you can have them do this automatically by instructing them to do that in their chat options. So as far as I can tell, those are the important bits from this PR. You can now lock your doors if you're so inclined. You can instruct NPCs to lock doors that they travel through, which is new, and it has not been added to all vehicle doors in the game, but must be manually added with a locking mechanism by the player. Oh, and do not forget to add locks, by the way, to your rear doors and hatches as well. It won't do any good if you lock all your doors and leave the back hatch unlocked. Now let's move on to my concerns and thoughts about this PR here. So first of all, I don't see much of a reason for you to install these locking mechanisms. There really only are two situations I can see where these have value. Now most NPCs that you encounter will either be friendly or neutral, and they don't try to get in your car unless you recruit them. Then they will try to get in your car to travel with you. Or the NPC you encounter is hostile, in which case they are much more likely to end up shooting at you than trying to open these doors, so the lock doesn't really help you there. Most of the time that I encounter hostile NPCs, they almost always have a gun, but there are, obviously there are situations where the NPC is using melee and will try to close the gap with you. Having a lock in that situation is beneficial and will prevent them from reaching you unless they destroy the door or lock or come through your windshield or something like that. Now additionally, ferals are the other possibility here. Ferals can open doors. So having a lock on your car door won't actually prevent a feral from throwing rocks at you, but it will prevent them from opening the door to engage you in melee. Now they would have to either destroy the door or the locking mechanism to break in and get at you, which they are capable of doing. However, that does obviously take time and give you a chance to come up with a plan. And obviously that also is a situation where having that lock would be beneficial. They wouldn't be able to get to you for melee combat. As for all of the zombies in the game, they don't open doors, so a closed door is just as good as a locked door in that situation. Also, as an additional side note, I never mentioned this, car locks can be picked from the outside using lock picking. However, this is currently the only option for unlocking a door from the outside, and I think if car locks are going to be a thing, there 100% needs to be a way for us to just smash a window. I really dislike lockpicking in the game at the moment, and the most obvious answer for a player who needs to get through a door like this would just smash the window. Why? I'm not going to spend, an hour and a half trying to pick a lock when I could just smash the window. And we'll talk more about that in a second. I probably should have mentioned that earlier. So anyway, those are the two benefits that I see in this new system, and they're good benefits. It will help you with some hostile NPCs, and it will help you sometimes kind of with ferals. Most of my concern comes from what this is going to mean in the future. Even in this PR, people were already commenting about wanting individual keys for vehicles. And I was going to talk about this at length and why I think this is just super bad for the game, but I'll spare you a really long-winded rant here. To summarize it very briefly, some people want all car doors to be locked by default and using a car to require either finding a key or hotwiring every single vehicle in the game. And look, it tracks with realism, but most people do lock their car doors and cars do require individual keys. I just think this will ultimately be extremely tedious and a terrible addition to the game. So although this PR adds a lock, which is situationally useful, I am very concerned over where people will take this in the future. Every car door being locked means you either need to pick them, or we would need a low-tech solution to allow us to smash windows, which would mean, tracking every door to determine if the window is open, closed, or smashed. This would also make locks pointless against ferals and NPCs because they would be smart enough to just smash the window, open the lock, and come in at you. So in that situation, why even have the locked door when any, person capable of opening that door is also smart enough to just smash their way inside? Not to mention, it would require hot wiring every single vehicle in the game or somehow finding a key to it, which is incredibly unlikely. We would have to track individual keys, which I think will be a nightmare both from a coding standpoint and a player experience standpoint. And look, we'll talk more about that in the future if this system actually starts heading in that direction. I couldn't look at this PR and not think about all of that stuff. This PR seems fine and even good, but the implications for the future, in my opinion, are very concerning. Hopefully I explained my thoughts well enough that you understand my standpoint here. And yeah, those are just my thoughts, so we're going to move on here, I guess. And then finally today from Vanera, we have some follow-up work on grabs and dragging grabs. Now as I sit to write this script, I have just looked over the PR, and it's another one of those like 30 plus files changed and code that I'm probably not smart enough to understand. So I'm just going to be going off the summary of the PR here and what what little I know, to be perfectly honest. So first of all, grabs were removed from being hard-coded, which this is almost always a good thing when stuff like this happens because it enables non-code contributors to tweak and make things in JSON. It also seems to have heavily tweaked dragging grabs, so they will now check and interact if something else is already grabbing you when you are dragged off by another zombie. It will also not be possible for them to drag you if you are wearing a seatbelt, which, is great. We've had a long-standing issue where grabbers could yank you out of a moving vehicle even though you were wearing a seatbelt, and this should be a fix for that. So that on its own is really good news, and I'm happy to see that be changed. Now it also did fix other issues like grabs still existing after an enemy is killed. Now you've probably seen this, it's pretty common. You kill the enemy that was grabbing you and you have the little grabbed icon, like you're still grabbed even though the enemy is dead and blah blah blah, etc. And this could lead to some issues if you were still in combat with other enemies and you were still flagged for a turn or two as being grabbed. That could cause some problems. It also fixed the nurse bot, removing only one bionic, which apparently is not how that's supposed to work. It's not really clear to me if this will be done now in one action where they'll just remove a ton of bionics all at once, or if it's more like you fall asleep, get one removed, wake up, fall asleep, get one removed, etc., etc. I don't really feel like going through the hurdles to try and test that. Setting up an auto dock and a nurse bot and all that's a little bit much. I don't know how to make auto docks work when you manually spawn them, so I can't really test that one. But anyway, I'm sure this PR did a lot of other things, or at least there's probably more nuance to it than what I've explained here, but I just don't really know. You're free to take a look at the PR if you're interested. Of course, there will be a link in the description for those of you who can read these PRs and codes and stuff like that. So now, the bulk of what I saw in the files change does seem to have been the unhard coding part, and it's pretty difficult for me to sift through and understand what was changed here. And with that, everyone, thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. I was going to talk about some of the issues I've been having, why this video was late, and etc., but you've heard enough of that over the last couple of weeks. I have been having some health issues, but I don't know what those are about yet, so I don't have anything to report other than that they're very scary, and I'm really not doing very well physical health-wise, but what are you going to do? So for now, everyone, thank you for watching. Things may continue being slow for a little while longer. I'm always hopeful that, next time we do a video, it'll be on time and everything will be okay. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. So for now, thanks for being here as always, and I'll see you in the next episode.